I've been encouraged by my time with you. I hope you've been encouraged too. I've tried to approach this with a measure of sensitivity and love, and I hope that you have enjoyed the time that we have together. But I also want to say this before we leave this afternoon. I do want to say, if I can help be of any assistance to anyone in this congregation beyond the time that we have this afternoon, I'd be happy to share any of this material with you. If you want to have other conversations on what I've read, whether it be in the academic research or some of the so-called Christian literature, things like that, I'd be happy to point you to sources, things that I've looked at and studied in some of this preparation. Been through 2 lessons now. Whatever happened to gender? Looking at certain cultural currents in our society, whether in the United States or in Europe or throughout the world, certain major influencing powers that be, whatever happened to gender. We then looked at the need for transformation and how that is a necessity given by God for all people of all places and for all times, and that finding our identity in Jesus Christ is where, once we lose ourselves in Him, we find the fullness of what it means to be who we are, created in God's image, embracing the resiliency and the flourishing that God would have us to have as being one of His children. What a wonderful opportunity that we have. The third lesson this afternoon, where I want to conclude, is in looking at individuals who have gone through transitioning. Individuals who have gone through transitioning and are making the journey back, and looking at some of their stories and how we can look at their lives as examples in terms of what happens when a person goes to trans and then comes back. I want to invite you, as we introduce that this afternoon, to imagine that in the audience this morning, imagine that it's a Sunday morning and that you're gathered to worship God. It's your favorite day of the week. It's the day, the Lord's Day, when you come to exalt the God of all creation, to lift up your voice in praise to Him. You come on a Sunday to bring your offering to God, and it is Him that you want to glorify and worship. Imagine that it's a Sunday, it's your favorite day of the week, it's the Lord's Day, and in the back, you notice that a woman walks in the back of the door. Her name is Madison. And as you witness Madison walking in across the foyer, you happen to notice that there are a few eyes that are looking at her. As you approach Madison and you greet her, you thank her for being in your presence. And as you engage with Madison and as you begin to have this discussion with her, some things start going off in your mind. You notice that Madison gives you a firm handshake. You notice that Madison has a little bit more hair on her arms than most women do. You happen to notice that as you shake Madison's hand and you listen to her voice, that she has a more pronounced Adam's apple than what you've recognized before, and she has a little bit deeper voice, and you happen to notice that she's in a dress and she has facial stubble. Although she is clean shaven, you notice that there are some red flags going off in your mind that Madison for a woman is a bit masculine. You don't let that stand in your way of getting to know her. Your family befriends her. You take her out to lunch. You find out that she was baptized at age 16, that she attended a Christian college and went away to that Christian college, but she hasn't been engaged with the church for a number of years, and you learn that she's been distant from the church for some period of time. But as you begin to know Madison, and as you take her out to lunch with your family, as you engage with her, and as you talk with her, you don't have the heart to ask her, why does she seem so masculine if she's a woman? You would never do that. You're going to be there for her, and you're going to talk to her, and you're going to treat her as a friend. I want you to let that case, that instance, sit in your mind for just a moment and think about this question. If you wanted to share the love of Christ with someone who has taken that journey, maybe they've gone all the way through transitioning from the social transitioning, which could be the change of pronouns, the change of clothing, the change of gender roles, and then they went to the medical transitioning and they went through the medications, whether hormone blockers or estrogen or testosterone, or if they then went through the surgeries and then they went through the legal transitioning in terms of their name changes and Social Security and passport. Imagine, what would you say? How would you engage someone like Madison? How would you share with them the gospel of Jesus Christ? Where will Madison go in our society for help? I'm afraid that individuals who have gone through the process of transgender reassignment, and whether we're talking about medical transitioning or surgical transitioning or both, legal transitioning as well, where would they go for help in society? What's interesting when you start looking into the medical literature is this. I want to share this quote with you. It's from 2020. WPATH stands for the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Listen to what Catherine Butler and Anna Hutchinson wrote in February of 2020 in the Journal for Child and Adolescent Mental Health. They wrote this: WPATH standards of care will include a section on detransitioning, confirming that this is an increasingly witnessed phenomenon worldwide. It also highlights that compared to the extensive protocols for working with children, adolescents, and adults who wish to transition, watch what they say, nothing exists for those working with desisters or detransitioners. So imagine if you're a healthcare provider. Imagine if you're a counselor. Imagine if you're a pharmacist or a physician or a pediatrician or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or if you're a nurse or if you're working as a physician assistant or a nurse practitioner. Imagine if you're working in healthcare and this is the opinion, that there is nothing. In other words, there is a large consensus, several major medical bodies in the United States that are saying gender-affirming care is the way to go, but what about the patients that say, no, I'm going back to my origin? And what Butler and Hutchinson say is this, that nothing exists for those working with them. Now, in American medicine, 100 years ago, the motto in American medicine was one of paternalism. That is the notion that doctor knows best. Doctor gives you something to do, doctor gives you advice, doctor tells you what to do with your health, you take his advice. The motto in American medicine has shifted over time, though. Now the motto in American medicine is that of shared decision making, which means if you were to go to the doctor and you were having a diagnosis of cancer, the doctor might lay in front of you, hey, here are some different procedures. Here is chemo, radiation, surgery. These are the different options that you have. These are the benefits and risk with each of those options. And we want to help you make an informed decision, but ultimately, you're going to exercise your informed consent for any of those options, those viable options that we provide for you. This notion of shared decision making is not new in American medicine, but I want you to recognize this, that when it comes to gender health, it's gender-affirming care and almost nothing else. What happened to shared decision-making? What happened to, in a world where people have different opinions about what they should do with their bodies, that medicine is saying that nothing, these people are saying that nothing exists for those who want to do this, right? Who want to affirm that what their minds believe about who they are aligns with their anatomy. Think about what Hutchinson is saying here. What Hutchinson and Butler are saying in this is that if a person believes that their mind, what they believe about their body, aligns with their anatomy, That there exists nothing in medicine to confirm that, to affirm that direction? You'll affirm one way but not the other? This is the United States that we live in. A psychologist by the name of Dr. Laura Edwards Leeper has said this. She said, "We cannot carry on in this field that involves permanently changing young people's bodies if we don't fully understand understand what we're doing and learn from those we fail." She said, "We need to take responsibility as a medical and mental health community to see all the outcomes." What's she saying? She's saying this. She's saying that there are changes that these medications and these processes and procedures can do to people's bodies that sometimes they will be presented to patients as if, hey, listen, this is all benign. You can go through these and take these medications. And what she's saying is that, listen, you're taking these medications and we don't know the long-term effects of what this might do to you. We know that people's minds and their brains, they don't stop developing in their teens. That in neuropsychology and in neuroanatomy, and when you're looking at the brain and different processes in the brain, that brains are still developing even on into their 20s. And so if transitioning has happened at age 6, 7, 12 with hormones, injections, surgeries at age 50, what then, right? What now? I want to give you a few terms that you may not be familiar with. Dr. Atul Gawande has said in a different context, he has said this, and I think his comments are interesting. He's a New York Times bestseller, a Harvard physician, but he said this in a different context, and I think it would apply when we start thinking about detransitioning. He says this, "I guess the lesson is you can't always count on the doctor to lead the way. Sometimes the patient has to do it." I think those are powerful words. I think they would apply to this context. What are some things that we can look at in terms of when you start talking about transitioning, going either to male to female or female to male, or coming back? Let me give you some language. You're perhaps familiar with some of this, maybe not all of it. The Bible basically presents gender and sex or biology as one. You can read through, and I could send you a list. There's a ton of Hebrew words that describe male and female counterparts, but never is there a third category. And you could look at different Hebrew words: son, daughter, boy, girl, brother, sister, young man, young woman, bridegroom, bride, father, mother, father-in-law, mother-in-law. There's all these Hebrew words: uncle, aunt, manservant, maidservant, prophet, prophetess, prince, princess, king, queen. In the Hebrew, in your Old Testament, there's not a third category. It's male or female. You come over into the New Testament and look at the Greek, and there's no third category. So the notion that my mind, when it comes to gender, that my sense of male or female, what I psychologically believe, my perceptions, are somehow different than my body, is foreign to the New Testament. It's foreign to the Old Testament. That's not there. And when you think about this, in the last 50 years, would you and I be discussing a topic like this if it weren't for, as Dan mentioned earlier, me being a drug dealer, being a pharmacist? Would we be having these conversations? Would I be preaching a sermon this afternoon on this if it weren't for medicine in terms of medication that are offered to people and then surgeries that are done? Because I can tell you this, that when Bruce Jenner wants to transition to Caitlyn Jenner, he's XY male in his genes, and even with medications and even with surgeries and even with clothes, he's still XY male. His genetics haven't changed, and he hasn't gone through genetic manipulation that would take his body into that realm, if you will. So the Bible would present people as being, gender would be binary, and it wouldn't be different than your anatomy and what might present in when it comes to anatomy. When we think about how we are created in science, sometimes we talk about humans. Humans exhibit what's known as sexual dimorphism. Now, if you're in a biology class, you might have heard that word before. Kind of a scientific term that makes reference. When you hear the word dimorphism, you think of di like two, morph like morphology, having to deal with form. And so sexual dimorphism means that humans, biologically speaking, are in two different realms. In other words, we're not like seahorses where, males and females, you're trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is the seahorse? Is it male or female? I've heard that male seahorses carry the little ones, and so quite a bit different than humans. But in biologically speaking, we would exhibit this form. Our forms would be different because our genes are coding for proteins. Men look different than women, and their bodies look different than women, and our reproductive abilities, our primary and secondary sexual characteristics are different. Why? We are sexually dimorphic. The forms of our bodies are different. God's designed us that way, and so I want us to see that. Here's an interesting quote in the literature. This is written by a man by the name of Robert Smith, and he's written a book, How Should We Think About Gender and Identity? And he says this, he says, so while all kinds of things can and do go wrong with each and every one of us, both physiologically and psychologically, the Bible offers no support to the idea that one can actually be a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body. That may well be a person's subjective feeling, but it is not an objective fact. Vaughan Roberts has said this, our culture says your psychology is your sexual identity. Let your body be conformed to it. The Bible says your body is your sexual identity. Let your mind be conformed to it. These are interesting quotes when we start thinking about the differences, and God would align our minds with our anatomies. When we start talking about gender roles, the Bible has much to say about that. In the Old Covenant, it was forbidden for a woman to wear a man's garment. The text says, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. These things were an abomination to God. You look in 1 Corinthians chapter 1:15, and a woman's long hair is for her glory. You look at Titus chapter 2 and verse 5, and women are to be caretakers in the home. You look at 1 Timothy 5:14, and younger widows are to manage their own households. You look in Romans chapter 1, and you see that unnatural acts of men with men or women with women are strictly forbidden. You turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 9, and this effeminate passive homosexuality is strictly forbidden by God. There's a Greek word there known as malakos, and passive homosexuality is forbidden in the text. There is certainly, when we look at Scripture, gender roles. I'm not saying that every man has to like NASCAR, or that a woman can't like NASCAR. Every woman in the audience this afternoon would certainly agree that it's not a sin for a man to cook or clean, right? And so when we start talking about gender roles and things of that nature, it's important to look at what the Scriptures have to say in terms of that. You may have heard the word cisgender. Cisgender is a term that floats around from time to time, and simply what that means is that the body aligns with the mind. The mind aligns with the body. Biological sex and psychological gender align. When that is incongruent, this is known as gender dysphoria. There's a medical diagnosis for gender dysphoria that's there. If you meet certain criteria for a period of 6 months, you could be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Also, it's important to be aware there's a term that you may be familiar with known as heteronormative. Heteronormative behavior, you might hear that term from time to time, and that's an individual where both their mind and their body aligned. In other words, their psychology and their anatomy are on the same page in terms of talking about gender and sex and things of that nature. And they seek the opposite sex. This would be called heteronormative. So heteronormative would involve individuals who are cisgender that are seeking the opposite sex. Transgender, however, would be individuals who are seeking to transition away from their, what was sometimes referred to in the literature as natal sex, their biology of origin, if you will. When we talk about sexual orientation, this is different than gender identity. Make sure you make this distinction in your mind. If a person is considering transitioning, it may have nothing to do with sex. Sometimes individuals, because of trauma in their past, in other words, if an individual is seeking to go through transitioning, it may not be because they're seeking either hetero or homosexual activity. It could have nothing to do with sex. It could be that simply they've had trauma in their past. You take a young boy who has been traumatized in the home, and perhaps their father's an alcoholic, and they're subjected to hatred. Every time they're around, this young boy is around his father just spews venom at him, and he doesn't find any sort of acceptance among males, this man that should be setting a role model's example in his life. And here, every time he's around his dad can't stand him. His dad doesn't want him around. He's a plague to his dad. And so that trauma has an impact on a young man's life. And what he may do is say, okay, where in society will anybody accept me? Where can I find my belonging? And the man that should have been an example of virtue in my life, he despises me. So I'm going to go around some people that do accept me. And the way I'm going to do that is through transitioning. You see, that doesn't have anything to do with sex, really. It's just trying to find a sense of belonging. Because sometimes in lesbianism and homosexuality, it doesn't have anything to do with sex. It has to do with trauma in their past. Their dad was an alcoholic. Their mom was a drug addict. Or it could be, any number of certain stimulating things that lead a person to finding acceptance among a group. And we as the church must be that city that's set on a hill that says, you know what? If you felt like an outcast in your life, I want you to know that this is the group with which you belong. You found people that will support you in ways that your home, I'm sorry, never have. You belong in the body of Christ. And He can do things for you that no other person can do for you. I want us to see that in these things, when we talk about some of these things, it's important that we understand some of these distinctions. Sexual orientation is a person's preference, what they prefer, and this is how it's used in the popular culture. Transgender, though, a person can be a trans man. This is an individual who is born female that seeks to transition to male. A person can be a trans woman where they're born male and they migrate from masculinity to femininity. That would be a trans woman, trans masculine. That's how that phrase is used. When we start talking about transitioning individuals, there are different layers to this whole discussion. Social transitioning would have to deal with dress, perhaps a change of a person's pronouns. I was looking, the American Pharmacy Association is having a conference, and I was noticing some of the speakers recently, and they had in parentheses, he, she, and then they also had they, them. So how does the speaker wish to be identified? That's the whole discussion about pronouns that's out there. So social transitioning, it would involve that. It would involve gender roles. Are you changing your gender roles? Medical transitioning would involve medications, puberty blockers. If you're going through male to female transitioning, that would involve bringing on board estrogens if you're going through that medical transitioning. If you're going female to male, then they would put on board testosterone that would cause changes in facial hair, deeper voices, changes in Adam's apples, and things of that nature. Then there's also surgical transitioning. I won't go into all the details concerning surgical transitioning in terms of, but there are some transitions that would go on with people's faces and their heads. There's forehead contour modification, eyelid modification, cheek augmentation, nose reshaping. If a person was transitioning male to female, they could also have Adam's apple surgery. And there's top surgery that happens for both men and women, and bottom surgery that happens for both men and women, and I won't detail all the aspects of that. Then there's also legal transitioning, when a person begins to change their name or their Social Security identification, their driver's license, birth certificates, passports. All of these things would be involved in terms of discussions about transitioning. I do want to make you aware of a group of individuals that you may not be familiar with. There are individuals, a segment of society, that are sometimes grouped in with transitioners like Bruce Jenner. There are between 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 4,500 live births per year among individuals that are known as individuals who have experienced disorders of sexual development. What does that mean? It means that there are individuals, some in the United States, who are born with both male and female tissue. The old outdated term is hermaphrodite. You may have heard that. It's not used anymore. Another term that's thrown around sometimes is intersex. If you've heard the acronym LGBTQI, the I there in that acronym is intersex. That's also a term that's not used in medicine much, but this has to do with individuals who are born with both male and female tissue. And so genetically, take for example Turner syndrome. This happens in 1 in 2,000 and 1 in 3,000 live female births, where they would have a chromosomal abnormality. There would be no Y chromosome. So when you start looking in the genetics of that, typically there are 2 sex chromosomes. Every one of us have typically 2 sex chromosomes. If you're female, you're XX female. If you're male, you're XY male. But with Turner syndrome, they are 45X. So there's a chromosome that's absent there. There's no Y chromosome. They can take on female characteristics with Turner syndrome. There's also what's known as androgen insensitivity syndrome, where there's a mutation on their androgen receptor. There's also a condition known as Klinefelter syndrome. So there are conditions that are out there that there could be people in the pews, people that you know, that have these disorders of sexual development. What happens is very early in their life, parents, healthcare providers, endocrinologists, pediatricians are making decisions about what happens with these people in society. And I want you to know that this is a very different conversation than the conversation about the Bruce Jenners of the world. These individuals are not electing these things. These individuals, these babies are not saying, I'm, trapped in the wrong body, that kind of conversation, if you will. In John chapter 9, Jesus said this. The Bible says this about him. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. These individuals haven't done anything wrong. They haven't sinned. They haven't gone through transitioning, and they're born, right, with sometimes both tissues. When we talk about desisters are individuals in society who are reverting to their sex of origin, and they may have gone through changing their pronouns or their clothes or their hairstyle, but they haven't began medical transitioning. So these individuals, desisters, are going back. Detransitioners, I want to share with you the stories of a few people, and then we'll draw this to a close this afternoon. I want to share with you the case of Grace Lindinsky Smith. Grace Lindinsky Smith, she was born female. She told her story on 60 Minutes. She was in her 20s. She was depressed. She experienced gender dysphoria. She decided to go through a full transformation. She regrets the fact that people were not more scrutinizing with her as she sought this transition. So she went to a therapist, and it seemed like in her care that it was just green light after green light after green light. In terms of her gender dysphoria, she ended up going through and having injections, and then she had surgeries. And she said that her gender dysphoria, it stemmed from other mental health issues. She told her story on 60 Minutes. And she said this: I wanted people to understand that trans medicine is not always being administered responsibly and safely. She said, I knew I had been badly hurt by my transition, and I wasn't the only one. Grace Lindinsky Smith, she's a detransitioner. Mark Wenzel. Mark Wenzel, interestingly, is a 7-foot-tall conservative Baptist preacher. In 2006, at the age of 46, he came out as transgender, and Matt Kliegman followed Mark, who transitioned from Mark to Marky. And Matt Kliegman followed him for 10 years, and they recorded this documentary about his transition with pronouns, and then the struggle over the legality of his birth gender, and then his transition, his detransitioning back. So there's this documentary out known as Marky in Milwaukee, and that profiles his life. Kyla Gillespie is an interesting story. Kyla Gillespie is Canadian. She grew up and was born female in British Columbia. At age 5, she had gender dysphoria. She did go through a period of time where she had same-sex attraction. She was a great athlete. She was a professional women's hockey player. And in 2011, she transitioned from female to male. She lived as a male for 6 years. But she said this, Kyla said this, that her faith played an important role in her detransition. And when asked what led her back, she said she felt empty. She had gone through the transitioning. She said that she felt empty. She talks about having one surgery after the other. The notion that being male would make her whole and complete, she said it was simply not there. But she went through with it. She lived as a male for 6 years. She said she felt empty. She felt broken. She was crying out to God, and she wanted to seek her identity in Jesus. Chloe Cole, you might have seen her testimony last summer before Congress. She's only 19 years old. She says her childhood was ruined by medicine. Listen to her words. She said, I used to believe that I was born in the wrong body. This is what she testified before a House Judiciary Subcommittee. She said, and the adults in my life whom I trusted affirm my belief, and this caused me lifelong irreversible harm. She said, I speak to you today as a victim of one of the biggest medical scandals in the history of the United States. I speak to you in the hope that you will have the courage to bring the scandal to an end and ensure that other vulnerable teenagers, children, and young adults don't go through what I went through. Chloe Cole said that American medicine failed her. At 12 years old, she was diagnosed with gender dysphoria. She said she felt like a boy. She looked up to her brothers, and all she meant in hindsight now is that she hated puberty. She came out by laying a letter on the kitchen table to her parents. Her parents were put forward with the question that I gave you earlier today. Would you rather have a trans son or a dead daughter? That was Chloe Cole. She testified before Congress. At age 13, she went through and had a testosterone injection. She experienced hot flashes. At 15, she had major surgery, a double mastectomy. She said she had made a horrible mistake. At 16, after this surgery, she was suicidal. She said she's living with the consequences. She said her skin grafts even now continue to weep fluid. Listen to what she says. She says, my doctors with their theories on gender thought that all my problems would go away as soon as I was surgically transformed into something that was vaguely resembled a boy. Their theories were wrong. The drugs and surgeries changed my body, but they did not and could not change the basic reality that I am and forever will be, she says, a female. Walt Heyer struggled with his gender at age 4. He got married in his 20s. He had 2 children. He worked for an automobile company as an executive. In 1983, he went through reassignment surgery. He tells of discovering the truth and what led him away unto even having surgical reversal. He's written several books. One of his books is entitled Trans-Life Survivors. He wants to help other people who have reversed course and come back. Camille Keifel, she grew up with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. She struggled with her feminine identity. She started wearing boys' clothes. She was attracted and found male anime characters interesting. She hadn't heard about being binary till she got to college, but she kind of liked the idea. Her family was supportive of it. She didn't have any pushback. The surgeons went forward with surgery on Camille. Camille says this, that if the doctors would have questioned her, they would have been considered transphobic. You see, surgeons, physicians, pediatricians, these major medical consensus organizations kind of tie their hands. You question a patient's decision to go forward with transitioning? Does that mean I fear you now? I'm transphobic if I suggest you ought to wait? See, medicine, that's where we're at these days. Their stories are painful, are powerful, and seeing their pain and what they've gone through are powerful reminders that the people are making changes that would accord more with godliness. I want to leave you this afternoon with a couple helps that I believe would help Madison. Remember Madison that we talked about in the beginning? She walked into your congregation. You didn't know that she was detransitioning, but she is. How might you help her? Imagine if you had a few moments of her time and you could share with her the beauties of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Here's what the text would lead you to help her with. Madison, I would want you to know that your best life, that you can have your best life now. It's not about what's in the rearview mirror. It's not about where you've come from. All of us have come from different places in this world, but it's about finding our flourishing, our abundance in Christ now. Jesus came to give us life and to give it to us more abundantly. John chapter 10 and verse 10. He wants us to love life and see good days. That flourishing, that resiliency, that fullness, it exists in Jesus. And I would want Madison to know that she could have that. I would want Madison to know that the church, it is her refuge. She might find self-help groups in certain areas to be helpful. But I want her to know that this is her family. That you belong here, that we have time for you. We're not going to look at you as an outcast. You've come home. You look at the picture in Luke chapter 15, it's a picture of God the Father, there with open arms, welcoming his son home. Yes, my son was dead, but now he is alive. He was lost, and now he's found. Madison, if you come back to Christ, I want you to picture God with his arms open, with a feast being prepared, putting on you the robe and the golden ring. And Madison, I want to be the first to welcome you home. You belong in the church. This is your refuge. Madison, I want to listen to you. I want to listen to what led you to transition and what makes you want to come home. I want you, Madison, to let God lead you every step of the way. Your life can be so full when you let God take the wheel. And Madison, I want you to embrace the fullness of femininity that God would have you have in being an authentic woman created in the image of God. And whatever you are in life, you know, Madison, you could help some other people that are taking this journey with detransitioning. How would you help Madison? What in Scripture would you use to help someone like Madison to come back? When you think about Christianity, I'm going to leave you with this, and then we will have a closing prayer in just a moment. Christianity is not magic. It's not a quick fix. It's a walk in the narrow way. Outside these walls, there will be people that don't embrace these particular viewpoints. We've got to understand that that's the world in which we live. We should expect, Jesus said that all that will live godly will suffer persecution. It may be the fact that individuals who disagree with you on these particular issues, that they ostracize you, that they push you to the side, that they dismiss what you have to say. But you know what? At the end of the day, lay all of what you value and what you are, find your belonging with God, and all of that other stuff in the world, just roll with it. God has all the answers. His Word has all the answers. The best part of you is not your masculinity. It's not your femininity. The best part of you, according to the Bible, is the Christ that lives and dwells in you. Whatever you are, whatever pedigree you have, wherever you went to school, wherever you were born and raised, whatever language that you speak, however, how much money you have in the bank, whoever your parents were, your children are, whatever gifts that God has given you, either by nature or by nurture. Use everything that you have and everything that you cultivate for His glory. I'll leave you with this verse. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 9. What no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love Him. This earth, it's not our home. We're all on a pilgrimage. We're all created in the image of God. Use your body, everything that you are, everything that you might cultivate. Use it for God's glory. That's what matters. Thank you.